This is a Fox News Alert. I'm Brett Baer in Washington. This is an expanded 2-hour edition of Special Report. Judgment Day for White House Chief Strategist Steve Bannon. He's been touted as someone who helped orchestrate candidate Trump's White House win, much to the chagrin of President Trump. He's been tied directly to several internal personnel battles inside the Trump White House. A self-described economic nationalist, he had a whiteboard in his office with all of the promises candidate Trump made on the campaign trail, pledging to keep White House policy to those promises. He was even comically portrayed as the Grim Reaper on Saturday Night Live, the political harbinger of death. Tonight, Steve Bannon is out. The White House issued a statement this afternoon saying Bannon and Chief of Staff John Kelly had agreed today would be Bannon's last day. Let's start off with two of the reporters intimately connected to what's going on at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Joining me tonight, Chief White House Correspondent John Roberts and Chief National Correspondent Ed Henry. John, first to you. What do we know about the timeline, the tick-tock of how this all went down?
Well, there's a couple of competing narratives that are going on here, Brett. First of all, White House sources have told me that this has been going on for several days now, that John Kelly, the new Chief of Staff, has been evaluating a lot of the people who are employed at the White House, and that it was Kelly and Bannon who came to an agreement that today was going to be Bannon's last day, suggesting that John Kelly had a pretty significant hand in the fact that Bannon was no longer going to be with the White House. However, people who are close to Bannon say that he actually tendered his resignation back on the 7th of August, that it was supposed to take effect the beginning of this week, but it got pushed because of the aftermath of the events in Charlottesville. So two competing narratives there, but there's no question, I think, Brett, that Bannon's tenure at the White House has been somewhat uncertain for a number of weeks, if not months, and we do know that the president has got a little bit frustrated, at least with him, with the role that Bannon seemed to be taking, or at least the perspective of his role at the White House, with that Time magazine article, the way he was portrayed on late night television and whatnot, as being in much the same way Karl Rove was with George Bush, sort of Donald Trump's brain.
Yeah, Ed, we saw Tuesday the president was asked in that now legendary news conference at Trump Tower about Steve Bannon's prospects. Take a listen.
Tell us broadly what your do you still have confidence?
Well, we'll see. And look, I like Mr. Bannon. He's a friend of mine. But Mr. Bannon came on very late. You know that. I went through 17 senators, governors, and I won all the primaries. Mr. Bannon came on very much later than that. And I like him. He's a good man. He is not a racist. I can tell you that. He's a good person. He actually gets a very unfair press in that regard. But we'll see what happens with Mr. Bannon.
All right, it was a we'll see, Ed.
We'll see, but also think about it there. The president was still angry about this book, Devil's Bargain, where it basically puts Bannon on the cover with President Trump and makes him almost the leader of this Trump movement. And to follow on John, on top of Time magazine and all of the other accolades that suggested that, Steve Bannon was the brains, it's clear that it was still gnawing at the president on Tuesday at that now famous news conference that I'm the one who went through 17 different Republican candidates. I'm the one who's the leader of this movement. And so they were, and he came so late because remember, Bannon only came on in August of 2016. He wasn't there at the beginning, was the president's points. But beyond that, I want to point out something new this hour I'm hearing. A source close to Bannon just reached out to me and said that they are seeing all this speculation out there tonight that Steve Bannon is allegedly going to go to war with Donald Trump and that he's going to use his old news organization, Breitbart, to attack this White House. This source close to Bannon told me this is completely untrue. He said, quote, no way. He 100% will have the president's back, and added that Bannon believes the president is, quote, a great man and a great president. Now, whether that holds up, whether that's just spin in the early hours, everybody's friends, it's going to be fine, we shall see. But the Bannon camp is telling me tonight that there's a lot of garbage out there, frankly. They think that he's going to war with the president.
Yeah, that's interesting, John. Pointing to that, the timeline is key here because you have this interview with the American Prospect, which his people said he thought was off the record. But in retrospect, it seems a little far-fetched that he thought it was off the record, in which, among other things, he says on North Korea, there's no military solution to North Korea's nuclear threats. Forget it until somebody solves the part of the equation that shows me that 10 million people in Seoul don't die in the first 30 minutes from conventional weapons. I don't know what you're talking about. There's no military solution here. They got us, which was direct contradiction, obviously, to the president's fire and fury threat to North Korea. It seems like this was his kind of flaming glory on his way out, doesn't it?
Well, let's put it this way. I've talked to Steve Bannon quite a lot in the last year and a half, and Bannon is a very smart cookie. And he knows when things are on the record, and he knows when they're off the record, and he knows when they're on background. So for this, and I was told the same thing, that he thought that this was off the record. I think he's smarter than that. I think he knows when it's on the record, when it's off the record. And it may be that this was a kind of an exit interview for him, but I am told by the White House that the statements that he made to the American prospect were, quote, not helpful in terms of his tenure at the White House. But then again, if you believe the other competing narrative in the timeline out there, he had already tendered his resignation. I am told, though, that this idea of Bannon going to war is not going to be going to war with the president. It will be going to war with the establishment people in the Republican Party.
Or how many people inside the White House?
That he has never, ever had a fondness for. And inside the White House, that would include people like Jared Kushner, H.R. McMaster, and Gary Cohn, who he's never had close relationships with. So, and I'm also picking up some buzz inside the White House that there still may be other departures ahead. We heard that Gary Cohn was going to stay after he was said to be upset with what the president said about Charlottesville. But now people are looking at Jared Kushner for a number of different reasons and saying, well, maybe it's time for Jared Kushner to leave the White House as well, which would be really interesting because I suspect that he and his wife Ivanka would join him in going back to New York.
Yeah, that is quite something. John, Ed, thank you very much, gentlemen. Just some breaking news now. We're getting over the wires. Carl Icahn has said in a letter to President Trump that he has agreed to cease to act as special advisor to the president on issues relating to regulatory reform. Carl Icahn, one of the businessmen, close ties to Donald Trump before he was a candidate, as he was a candidate, signed on to deal with regulations. Now, in a letter to the president, says he is going to stop being a special advisor to the president on issues relating to regulatory reform. We will follow that, give you the breaking news as it develops and reaction from the White House. Let's get more perspective on all of this. The Steve Bannon departure from a man who's worked up close with the Trump team. David Bossie served as Mr. Trump's deputy campaign manager. David, thanks for being here. Your take on, as we're breaking this down, what this means for this White House.
Well, I think that the president has come to count on Steve Bannon in many ways over the last year plus that Steve's been part of that orbit. Steve does get a bad rap, and I think what John was talking about is accurate. If you look at the campaign, just as one example, as an anecdotal evidence, is that Steve Bannon came onto a campaign that was incredibly in upheaval the second time with Paul Manafort leaving the campaign. It was very disorganized. Steve came in and organized that campaign and righted the ship. It was President Trump's campaign. President Trump is the candidate, but Steve was able to put an organization together that helped to get it across the finish line. So I think that there's a lot of people pointing fingers about chaos, but I don't know if Steve is 100% responsible.
Well, if you look at this White House and you talk about upheaval, and we'll put on the screen the firings or resignations since President Trump has been in office, I mean, it's quite stunning to see them all on one page. And you see all of these folks, the chief of staff, national security advisor, we're not even getting into the FBI director who was fired, third communications director, second White House press secretary. This is all from the time he took office until today. That is an administration in flux.
It is. Steve Bannon leaving is not going to change that, what's gone on in the past. Steve, when he leaves, and I think, again, it is not going to be that he is going to be at war at all with the president. He is 100% committed. I've talked to Steve today several times. He is 100% committed. He is. He's in excellent spirits, and he is 100% committed to making sure that President Trump's agenda, the agenda for the American people, succeeds. And that's what he is going to be now on the outside. A different place. And to be honest with you, you look at Corey Lewandowski and myself, for instance, we have just a terrific opportunity now with Steve as part of our operation to try and help from the outside. And not everything can happen from the inside. It's good to have folks like us on the outside.
I get that, Dave, but wasn't his role, or one of his roles, to be a disruptor, to be the elitists are not going to win, to be break up the establishment? And isn't their fight really also inside this White House with the Gary Cohns, the Dina Powells, the Jared, the Ivankas, the concern that the Trump conservative, if you want to call him that, is leaving the White House? Here is a quote from Kristen Tate. She's a columnist, and she says, if Bannon goes, so do Trump's biggest ties to his own base. So long to innovative policy ideas, goodbye to credible outreach to blue-collar factory workers and miners, au revoir to President Trump's political capital. Once Bannon goes, there's no going back. The American working class backed Donald Trump in record numbers for a reason. Bannon's views on trade, immigration, taxes, foreign policy crafted the Trump campaign's most successful moments. Bannon is more than the idea guy. He's perhaps the one person indispensable to Trump's goals aside from the president himself. Your take?
I think she is right on point with a lot of that. It's Steve Bannon leaving the White House does not necessarily stop him from helping the president fulfill that agenda. And actually, Steve's position is, with me today, is that it's now easier for him to do the things, to participate in a way that he's not handcuffed like he was inside the White House. Being on the outside, there's a lot of freedom, and you have a lot more weapons at your disposal than when you're handcuffed inside the White House.
But is he going to be trying to take out, not war with the president, but war with maybe some of those globalist, as he calls them, or elitist or establishment feelings that some of the other people inside the White House he has charged have?
Yeah, I mean,
this is his view.
I understand what you're saying, and I think that there is going to continue to be from Steve Bannon's point of view, pointing out to the media, to the American people, and to the president that here are the agenda items that got you elected, and here's what you promised the American people, just the whiteboard you're talking about, the list of promises that you made during the campaign, and here's how we need to fulfill them. Some of the people inside of your administration weren't with you during the campaign, and they don't agree with you on these policy positions now. And I think that that's going to continue, that he's going to continue to point those things out when it's necessary, because he's always been the voice that has had to rise up to be able to stop certain things from happening.
All right, last thing. This has been a while in the making, do you believe? I mean, it was not a result out of Charlottesville or anything else?
No, Brett, I think that you've seen the writing on the wall for quite some time. Even when Ryan Priebus left a few weeks ago, it was talk then, was Bannon in or out? This has been going on. I think General Kelly now has come in, really tried to I think, make the White House his own, and that's what he's doing.
Okay. Dave Bossy, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer joins us now with his reaction to this departure today. Charles, I want to play something. This is Thursday, and when the whole article came out with the American Prospect, this is what you said.
I think that Bannon just got Scaramucci'd.
You have to define that verb.
No, it's a new word. Actually, he was self-Scaramucci'd. It was kind of like a Japanese version of it, where you
Muchi.
Exactly, where you sort of you actually impel yourself. On North Korea, which he did speak extensively about, he totally contradicted the president. He ridiculed his position.
So what do you think about that now, in retrospect, and this move today?
I'm committed to the Scaramucci explanation. I mean, you could give me all these other reasons. You can tell me the writing was on the wall. You can tell me Kelly wanted a clean house. You can say it was inevitable once Reince left, he was going to leave. And you can tell me that he tendered his resignation a couple of weeks ago. It was only a matter of time. The fact is, he gave this interview to the American Prospect, after which you cannot remain in the White House. That was a machine gun attack on everybody else in the White House, and it was a takedown of two of the president's major positions, North Korea and trade with China, almost ridiculing them and sort of putting himself above them. Once you've done that, you can't go back. That was a classic Scaramucci, and it proves that you don't have to use profane language to be Scaramucci'd.
Is there a sense, I mean, you just heard the conversation we had with Dave Bossie about the Trump, if you want to call it a Trump conservative, but the Trumpist inside the White House, and he was the last kind of pure blood. There is Kellyanne Conway, who obviously was the campaign manager from his time on the campaign, but is there a sense that there's a shift now with General Kelly as chief of staff and Gary Cohn's, the Dina Powell's, the Ivanka and Jared's are winning the battle?
There's no question. They won the battle. Bannon represented the populist, ethno-nationalist wing, the one that actually helped Trump win the election. But it's a very difficult governing proposition. He was the last of the Mohicans, and he lost out. He tried to attack all his other enemies, the globalists, and I'm sure that on the outside, probably returning to Breitbart, and with the Mercer billionaire money, he will continue that battle. But he lost it inside the White House.
All right, Charles, we'll see you at the panel at 6 p.m. Thank you. What's your reaction to Bannon's departure? Let me know on Twitter at Brett Baer, and you can use the hashtag Special Report, or on Facebook at facebook.com/BrettBaerSR. We may use one of your comments later with the panel. Terror in Europe. New details in the hunt for terrorists. We will go live to Barcelona, Spain, when we come back.
This program is brought to you by your independent insurance.
News around the world now. Police in Spain are at this hour looking for suspects in 2 terror attacks. 14 people are dead, and authorities are after what they believe is an ISIS terror cell. Correspondent Benjamin Hall has the latest tonight from Barcelona. He joins us live. Hello, Benjamin.
Yeah, hi, Brett. Well, look, welcome. Good evening from Barcelona and from Las Ramblas, which is the beating heart of this city. And it was on this incredibly busy street yesterday at around 5 p.m. that white van plowed through pedestrians, swerving left and right, killing, in the end, 13 of them. And we're tragically learning that among those 13 was a 3-year-old boy and also an American named Jared Tucker. And that we're just learning recently. He was a 42-year-old from California, and he was here to celebrate his first wedding anniversary. But the attack didn't stop there, and it was clear that this was part of a wider cell. 8 hours later, and 62 miles south of Barcelona, there was another attack in a town called Cambril, where 5 terrorists in a car rammed police and pedestrians, killing 1 lady. Now, those 5 terrorists were killed there, and we're just also learning from Spanish media that one of those killed was the driver of that white van. But here in Barcelona, people already trying to get back to normal. The street opened up straight away, and you can see up and down it the memorials to those who died, and really it is a city trying to get back to normal. Earlier today there was a minute of silence as well. The Spanish Prime Minister as well as the King Felipe VI took part in that, and really you get a sense that this is a city that, as much as it was cowed initially by those attacks, is getting back to normal. But 4 people remain arrested, and the news now that 1 American dead, 42-year-old, and also the driver of that white van dead as well. Brett?
Benjamin Hall, just before midnight in Barcelona. Benjamin, thank you. Now to another hotspot around the world. It's not often that you hear a head of state advocating the killing of his own people, but that's exactly what Philippines President Rodrigo Duterte is doing in response to the deaths of dozens of people during his crackdown on illegal drugs. Reporter Kitty Logan shows us what's happening there tonight.
Yet more bloodshed on the streets of Manila. Over 90 people have been killed in drugs raids in the Philippines this week alone. It's one of the deadliest periods since President Rodrigo Duterte began a crackdown on illegal drugs over a year ago. He praised the latest raids, which also led to the arrest of over 250 people.
The 32 who died in a massive raid in Bulacan earlier, that's good. If we could kill another 32 every day, then maybe we can reduce what ails this country.
Philippines police are calling this latest phase of the war on drugs a one-time, big-time push. It's a coordinated operation in areas of high crime, often poor neighbourhoods. Opposition politicians have criticised the violence and the high death toll. But the police are defending their actions.
When we arrived here at Don Pedro area, the moment our police arrived, these two men fired at and fought our officers, which is what resulted in their death.
But the killings have sparked outrage, and there have been several protests in response. Human rights groups have warned the government's violent crackdown may amount to crimes against humanity. Police records show over 3,200 people died in drugs-related raids since the latest operation began in 2016. Several of the country's senators are calling for an independent investigation into the high death toll. But President Duterte has promised the fight against drugs will not stop. And today, the Philippines police forces are again under fire, this time over the death of a 17-year-old student, the latest victim to be shot dead in drugs raids. Witnesses claim the teenager was not armed. Brett?
Kitty Logan in London. Kitty, thank you. With White House Chief Strategist Steve Bannon leaving his job, it's time for a look back at some of his most interesting comments. The Chief Strategist, this is a sample from his appearance at the Conservative Political Action Conference here in Washington last February.
And this is the other thing that the mainstream media or opposition party never caught, is that if you want to see the Trump agenda, it's very simple. It was all in the speeches. All he's doing right now is he's laid out an agenda with those speeches, with the promises he made, and our job every day is just to execute on that, is to simply get a path to how those get executed. And he's maniacally focused on that. Just like they were dead wrong on the chaos of the campaign, and just like they were dead wrong in the chaos of the transition, they are absolutely dead wrong about what's going on today, because we have a team that's just grinding it through on what President Donald Trump promised the American people. And the mainstream media better understand something. All of those promises are going to be implemented. If you look at the lines of work, I kind of break it out into three verticals or three buckets. The first is kind of national security and sovereignty, and that's your intelligence, the Defense Department, Homeland Security. The second line of work is what I refer to as economic nationalism. The third, broadly, line of work is what is deconstruction of the administrative state. It's not only not going to get better, it's going to get worse every day in the media. And here's why. But by the way, the internal logic makes sense. They're corporatist, globalist media that are adamantly opposed to an economic nationalist agenda like Donald Trump has. He's going to continue to press his agenda. And as economic conditions get better, as more jobs get better, they're going to continue to fight. If you think they're going to give you your country back without a fight, you are sadly mistaken.
Steve Bannon at CPAC in February. Up next, we'll talk with the Five's Kimberly Guilfoyle about the Steve Bannon departure. We'll also check the top stories of the day. Keep it here.
The toothpaste that helps.
White House Chief Strategist Steve Bannon is out. The administration announcing today Bannon and Chief of Staff John Kelly had agreed today would be Bannon's last day. The controversial advisor has come under increasing fire amid President Trump's comments following racial violence last weekend in Virginia, but he's also credited by many Trump supporters as being the president's true populist visionary. I'm joined now by Kimberly Guilfoyle, co-host of The Five, tonight playing the role of Sean Hannity at 10 p.m. Eastern. Kimberly, thanks for being here.
Brett, great to be with you.
You know, your take on this move today kind of surprised a lot of people.
It surprised probably a lot of people. It didn't surprise me, Brett, because this was something that I was expecting was going to be a period of transition, a restart for the White House. As you know, a few weeks ago, I was at the White House for dinner and had a nice time with the President and the First Lady and other members of the Cabinet. And I think this was a direction that the President knew that he needed to go in. Obviously, there's going to be people that are upset with this decision, but it really is pressing the reset button for the White House in general in a direction that the President wants to go. I think he appreciates the service of Steve Bannon and his contribution that he's made to the country and to the President, and I'm sure that he will continue to be supportive of the President going forward.
So was he mad at Bannon for some of the things that had been out there about him being on the front of Time magazine or him being a part of this book with Joshua Green? Was he mad about that?
Well, Look, I think there's one president of the United States, and that's Donald J. Trump. So anyone else who thinks they're going to assume or take over that position would be sadly mistaken. I think in this case in particular, the president wants to remain just focused on his agenda about, bringing together great economic policies, job growth, positive GDP for the working men and women in the middle class that he really felt had been marginalized and left behind by prior administrations. So I think now going forward, this is something he's going to, focus on, 100%. You heard the president's comments just a few days ago and said that he appreciates Steve Bannon and the contributions that he's made, and also as it relates to the economy and some of his economic advice. But sometimes, you run the course, and now it's time for something fresh and new going forward and unifying his administration.
Yeah, conservative commentator Ann Coulter had this to say, telling the Daily Caller, this makes it appear that Trump is easily manipulated by the media. They just need to give all the credit to any White House staffer they want to get rid of. I dread to think who the media decide to get rid of next. Not good news. Instead of firing Bannon because Trump had his nose out of joint about the media giving Bannon all the credit for the victory, Trump should have hired 10 more like him. Media heads would have exploded. How big a deal is this going to be for Trump supporters who look to Bannon as kind of being the Trump inside voice, if you would?
I think this is going to be very tricky because, of course, he doesn't want to alienate those conservative groups, those core people that have been supportive and loyalists to the president from the beginning, people that also were very aligned, with Steve Bannon. You don't want to see that to be a distraction or something that peels off layers of support when the president's trying to move forward with his agenda. And you already see this playing out right now in terms of fallout. But I will tell you this. Absolutely, Steve Bannon did not, I don't think, plan on staying more than a year, and there was talk for many months that he was going to serve until about Labor Day. So to me, this is exactly what I had heard and known from even the past 9 months. I think he wanted to serve his country and help the president get going and move forward, and now it's time for, a new fresh start.
Kimberly Guilfoyle, co-host of The Five, tonight, anchoring Sean Hannity's show, 10 p.m. Eastern Time. Kimberly, we'll see you then.
All right, thanks. Lots more tonight.
As we take in another shakeup at the White House, some other headlines now. Venezuela's president continues his power grab in that country. Nicolas Maduro's new pro-government constitutional assembly is taking over duties of the opposition-led Congress. Delegates to the assembly unanimously approved a decree today, giving it the authority to pass legislation on a range of issues affecting Venezuela's security and sovereignty. The move follows a refusal by the congressional leadership to swear an oath of loyalty to that assembly. The top U.S. commander in Iraq says Iraqi forces are nearly set for the next step in the fight against ISIS. Lieutenant General Stephen Townsend says he sees the assault on the terrorist-held area of Tal Afar happening soon. The upcoming fight would follow weeks of regrouping Iraqi troops and repairing equipment after the retaking of Mosul in July. Defense officials are dealing with serious problems in military aviation. 2 more incidents just this week are calling new attention to what some consider a crisis in a key component of America's national defense. National security correspondent Jennifer Griffin reports from the Pentagon.
It's the latest incident marking an increase of high-profile military aviation mishaps. 4 Marines and a sailor showed signs of decompression sickness on board a Marine cargo plane. It lost pressure at 21,000 feet. While in Hawaii, 5 Army soldiers remain missing after their Black Hawk helicopter crashed Tuesday night during a routine nighttime training flight. Late last week, the U.S. Marine Corps grounded its entire aircraft fleet, some 850 jets, helicopters, and Ospreys, after 2 recent deadly crashes killed 18 Marines and a sailor. So far this year, there have been 14 non-combat aviation crashes involving U.S. military aircraft, 40% higher than this point a year ago. The uptick in crashes has the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee concerned.
We're working these airplanes beyond their design life.
Just last month, for the first time in the fight against ISIS, the U.S. Navy was forced to ground an entire F-18 fighter squadron after 2 pilots suffered from decompression sickness. The cabin pressure issue has been pervasive enough that the Navy now requires all deployed aircraft carriers be equipped with decompression chambers. The Pentagon says it has requested nearly $30 billion to fix the readiness issue. Currently, about 70% of Marine Corps jets and half the Navy's strike strike aircraft cannot fly, according to the services. In an exclusive interview last year, the head of U.S. Marine Corps Aviation, Lieutenant General Doug Davis, raised alarm bells. He's since retired.
What they need is they need more spare parts and they need a little more time to get those airplanes ready to go and do the flying and training they know they need to do as Marines.
The military has argued the problems were limited to trainers back home, not deployed forces. But there's increasing evidence the problem has spread and is now affecting those deployed overseas. An F-18 Super Hornet recently crash-landed in Bahrain after taking off from the USS Nimitz. Brett?
Jennifer Griffin at the Pentagon. Jennifer, thank you. Coming up next, the panel on the Steve Bannon departure today and the fallout, what it means politically. Stay with us.
Up until about 20 minutes ago, one of the most reviled, hated, despised people in Washington was Steve Bannon. Before the end of the day, he is going to be one of the most revered, respected, lionized members. You know what's going to happen? I'll tell you what's going to happen. They're going to say that Bannon realized this whole thing's up. It's over, and he wanted to go out, but he didn't want to resign because they'd call him a quitter. So he goes and gives that interview with that American prospect, this left-wing rag, and undercuts Trump on North Korea and undercuts Trump, and Trump fired him. That's the only Bannon wanted out of there. It was so bad in there that not even a guy sympathetic to the alt-right can put up with the kind of insanity going on in the White House.
Rush Limbaugh's take today on Steve Bannon leaving the White House, getting let go. Bannon says he was tendered his resignation on August 7th. The White House saying it was effective today. Tweet just moments ago from Joshua Green from Bloomberg. Just got off the phone with Bannon. If there's any confusion, this is quoting Bannon, out there, let me clear it up. I'm leaving the White House and going to war for Trump against his opponents on Capitol Hill, in the media, and in corporate America. With that, let's get some analysis now from Fox News media analyst and host of Fox's Media Buzz, Howard Kurtz, and from New York, Juan Williams, columnist with The Hill, and Lisa Booth, columnist for The Washington Examiner. Okay, Lisa, your take on this and the fallout of it.
Well, look, I think the biggest problem for President Trump is just the fact that we've seen so much turmoil in the White House. And that's a problem for President Trump. But I do think that we've seen General Kelly, obviously take some of these steps in trying to regain organization. But I also think that this palace intrigue is overblown because there's been this narrative in the media that somehow President Trump is being puppeteered by someone, whether it's Steve Bannon, whether it's Priebus, whether it's Jared Kushner. It doesn't matter who it is. It's the idea that President Trump, somehow this puppet of another person. But we saw with him, particularly if you look at the election, he went through 3 different campaign managers. In that process, he took down 16 opponents in the Republican primary who were better funded than him, who out-organized him, and also defeated Hillary Clinton, who spent 2 times as much as him and had something like 5 times the amount of paid staffers. So I don't think that President Trump is being puppeteered by one person. So I think the media is off in that analysis that we've continued to see with this coverage of President Trump.
We're just talking, Howie, about Josh Green from Bloomberg. He wrote a book, Devil's Bargain, Steve Bannon, Donald Trump, and the Storming of the Presidency. And by reporting of this, the president was not happy with that book and his cooperation with it. How much do you think that factored in, that he thought that perhaps Steve Bannon was getting too much credit? You heard it in his remarks Tuesday at that press conference.
Well, the president always bristles at any staff member who gets more attention, even briefly, than he does. But I think that's a minor factor. And I think there is a misconception about Steve Bannon's role in the White House. I know Steve Bannon. He's not some dark Svengali figure who is pushing or manipulating President Trump. Where he had his most influence, Brett, was on issues like trade and economic nationalism, where the president not only already agreed with him, but had been espousing this for decades. And the former Breitbart chairman, Steve Bannon, always viewed it as it was a short-term job. He would continue the war, as he said in that comment to Josh Green, on the outside. The idea that he's going to go to war with Trump, that's not true. He's going to go to war, continue his war against what he sees as the globalist faction inside the White House, against what he views as the populist arguments that he was making.
I guess the question, Juan, is that not in part going after or to war with the Trump administration? If he's going to war with the Gary Cohns, the Ivanka Trumps, the Jared Kushners, H.R. McMasters, those are people who now have this role that he does not have inside the White House.
Well, that's exactly on point, because I think the key player here is John Kelly, the new chief of staff, and clearly he wants to limit the notion of warring factions that lead to so many of the internal leaks that have bedeviled this president, but also the kind of different people talking into the president's ear. Kelly wants to have some sense of order, and he thinks it will help President Trump be clear with the American people and deliver his message. But the problem has been, I think, that Bannon goes in and is so combative at times, a character, that what he was doing was, in, I think, very clear tone, saying to the president, get out there and fight. Fight against the establishment, particularly, I think, painfully so on the political front, with the Republican establishment. Go after people like Dean Heller when it comes to voting on Obamacare, or go after Jeff Flake, the senator from Arizona. Again, if Jeff Flake comes out with a book, go right back at him. Go at Senator McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, again, a Republican. I think a lot of that infighting instinct that, you know what, the GOP establishment's not on our side, comes from Steve Bannon. Now, this is not necessarily a bad thing. People wanted President Trump to take office as the great disruptor. And I think that Bannon wanted disruption. But when it comes to things like battling against Gary Cohn on economic issues, I think it was to the point where it's either going to be Bannon or Cohn, or battling with H.R. McMaster over Russia and China. Again, Kelly had to make a call, and I think he made a very clear call. It was going to be McMaster, not Bannon.
Put into context this American Prospect interview, now knowing what we know, that he's out today, whether you believe that he gave his resignation August 7th or he was fired or told he was going to have to leave prior to that. You look at the context of, for example, this quote to American Prospect, they're wetting themselves. This is about going after other people in the administration. I'm changing out people in the East Asian at defense. I'm getting Hawks in. I'm getting Susan Thornton, acting head of East Asia and Pacific Affairs, out at state. That's a fight I fight every day here. We're still fighting. There's Treasury and National Economic Council Chair Gary Cohn and Goldman Sachs lobbying. We got to do this. The president's default position is to do it, but the apparatus is going crazy. Don't get me wrong. It's like every day. What about that? I mean, it was kind of a machine gun of his adversaries inside the White House and even on North Korean policy against the president.
Well, yeah, and obviously that's not good for the White House, right? Disarray and chaos is not good for order and trying to streamline things and get them done. And I think that's what we're seeing General Kelly attempt to do with this White House, is to streamline the process, bring some organization to the process. But to Juan's point, I mean, look, President Trump was already bucking other Republicans. We saw that clearly in the primary, which predated Steve Bannon. You look at a lot of his policy ideas when it comes to trade, which is contradictory to some of the individuals he surrounded himself in the White House. But that dates back. You can look at a Playboy interview in 1990 where he was espousing some of these trade ideas, right? But I also, again, I go back to the point where I think people are misinterpreting President Trump when they say that somehow, he's being puppeteered by someone. He trademarked "Make America Great Again" in 2012. So, I do think there's this continued underestimating of President Trump and his political calculus.
He's clearly the biggest figure in the Trump White House by far. Right. Juan, Lisa, Howie, thank you. Next up, we go live to Camp David and get the latest on the president's new Afghanistan strategy.
USA aid to me means peace of mind.
As we mentioned earlier, President Trump was at Camp David today exploring his options for Afghanistan with his national security team. Correspondent Kevin Cork is in Thurmont, Maryland, near Camp David, and joins us now. Good evening, Kevin.
Hey there, Brett. Now, will the president just decide to have a full-sail pullout of Afghan troops by the Americans, or will there maybe be a gradual reduction in the U.S. service personnel roles in Afghanistan, or maybe a gradual reduction followed by a pull? We just don't know. Those are just some of the scenarios the president is considering after huddling with his senior cadre of his national security advisors. And you can tell how important this meeting was at Camp David today, Brett, by looking at some of the big names there. We're talking about the Vice President, Mike Pence, the Secretaries of Defense and State, as well as his Attorney General. We're talking about the UN Ambassador and, yes, his National Security Advisor, H.R. McMaster, all either in Maryland or connecting by secure video link, hoping to help answer the burning question, how do we end America's longest war? Currently, there are about 8,400 U.S. service personnel in Afghanistan in a war that's now 15 years on at a cost of more than $714 billion. 10 American troops, by the way, have been killed there this year alone. Over 2,200 have died since the war began. More than 20,000 have been hurt. Here's what the president said a few days ago in previewing today's meeting at Camp David.
We're going to make a determination, Peter, in a very short period of time as to Afghanistan. I've been looking at it. It's our longest war in history, 17 years. That's unacceptable. We will be making decisions, as you know very well, and we're looking at that very closely.
We will move this toward a decision. As I said, I think it was yesterday publicly, we are coming very close to a decision, and I anticipate it in the very near future.
The administration sources telling us that the meeting centered on much more, Brett, than just strategic principles. It included the brass tacks, the way he put it. We're talking about security. How do we maintain it? Personnel. What levels are we talking about? And cost. We've spent trillions in the region. When is enough enough? The president saying tonight in a statement that he will announce to the American people when he is ready to make a policy shift. But as you pointed out, Brett, for now, he continues to mull over the recommendations of his senior national security cadre. Of course, we'll keep you posted on that. But for now, back to you.
Kevin Cork, live near Camp David. Kevin, thanks. So should the U.S. send more troops to Afghanistan, hold the line, or get out altogether? Let me know on Twitter, @BrettBaer. You can use the hashtag Special Report, or on Facebook at facebook.com/BrettBaerSR. But wait, there's more. Another brand new hour of Special Report coming up right now. We'll get the latest on this White House shakeup. We'll also talk to Brit Hume, and we'll go live again to Barcelona with new details in the hunt for terrorists. All that and more on a busy news night here on Fox News Channel. Hour 2 of Special Report after a quick break. Chief strategist is out, and there is political fallout tonight. Could a corruption trial give the GOP another U.S. Senate seat? And Monday's solar eclipse, what you need to know. This is Special Report. Welcome back to Washington. This is the second hour of Special Report tonight. I'm Brett Baer. President Trump is working a little shorthanded tonight as he tries to come up with a new plan for Afghanistan. That is because this is Chief Strategist Steve Bannon's last day. Bannon's controversial run as one of the president's top policy whisperers ends after a dramatic week of rumors and speculation. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts is here to start us off tonight with what we know at this hour. Good evening, John.
Brett, good evening. And we're learning more by the minute. He did not have the public profile of Sean Spicer or the prestigious title of Reince Priebus, but Steve Bannon is arguably the most powerful figure to leave the White House so far.
Monthly becomes repetitive.
In the early days of the administration, Steve Bannon appeared untouchable. The campaign chairman turned top strategist who shared a virtual mind meld with the president on populist ideology.
If you think they're going to give you your country back without a fight, you are sadly mistaken. Every day it is going to be a fight.
But today, the release from the White House. White House Chief of Staff John Kelly and Steve Bannon have mutually agreed today would be Steve's last day. We are grateful for his service and wish him the best. The writing had been on the wall for weeks. President Trump is said to have grown frustrated at the reputation Bannon developed as the real power in the White House, a figure portrayed on late-night television as a grim reaper, Darth Vader character who pulled the president's strings.
Can I have my desk back? Yes, of course, Mr. President. I'll go sit at my desk.
But while President Trump had growing reservations about Bannon, it was General John Kelly's arrival as chief of staff that accelerated the timeline. A White House official tells Fox News that Bannon tendered his resignation to the president on August the 7th. Bannon's departure was supposed to be announced earlier this week, but was pushed because of the aftermath of Charlottesville. At the president's now infamous Trump Tower press conference on Tuesday, it was clear something was up.
I like Mr. Bannon. He's a friend of mine. But Mr. Bannon came on very late. You know that. I went through 17 senators, governors, and I won all the primaries. He's a good person. He actually gets a very unfair press in that regard.
But we'll see what happens with Mr. Bannon.
The next day, Bannon gave a stunning interview to the left-wing American Prospect magazine in which he attacked his colleagues and contradicted the president's North Korea policy. An administration official told Fox News the interview, quote, didn't help Bannon's case.
They're corporatist, globalist media that are adamantly opposed to an economic nationalist agenda like Donald Trump has.
Bannon's departure drew the expected reaction from the left. The environmental group Sierra Club wrote, quote, good riddance to Steve Bannon, as his disgraceful brand of hate and vitriol deserves no place in the White House. Republican Congressman Lee Zeldin of New York, on the other hand, lauded Bannon's expertise and smarts.
He's someone that brought a lot of talent and wisdom. He understands world history like few others do in this country, so he brought a lot of skills.
House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi welcomed Bannon's departure, using it as an opportunity to bash the president, in a statement saying, quote, personnel changes are worthless so long as President Trump continues to advance policies that disgrace our cherished American values. It's unclear what Steve Bannon will do now that he has left the White House, but a couple of reports indicate that he plans to, quote, go to war on behalf of the president against his opponents on Capitol Hill, in the media, and in corporate America. Brett?
You know, he played a key role. Chief strategist, you look at the politics, you look at how things play out. Who fills that role now?
I think to a large degree, Kellyanne Conway probably will be. She's got the same sort of connection with the conservative base that Bannon did. She's got the president's ear. And so I don't know if she'll officially take on a title like that, but I think you'll see her probably get a little more face time with the president.
All right, John, thank you. Let's get more reaction now from a person who's seen quite a lot covering the nation's capital. Senior political analyst Britt Hume joins us now by phone. Good evening, Britt. Your thoughts on this change?
Well, hi, Brett. I think it's whatever the immediate causes were and whatever the exact timing was of the Bannon resignation and when Mr. Trump accepted it, it's pretty clear to me that this administration is an administration that barely needed a strategist because it has been pretty disorganized and higgledy-piggledy in its approach to a multitude of issues. And since that was his portfolio, it would be pretty hard to argue that he had been a great success. At the same time, of course, I think, Brett, that a lot of that might have had to do with the fact that it was hard to get the president to stay on the same page for more than a few hours at a time at certain intervals. But nonetheless, there it is, and it's not surprising to me that he is now gone. And, of course, there's also the question that General Kelly had to deal with of this brutal infighting that appears to have characterized nearly every hour of this administration, which I'm sure John Kelly has been trying very hard to put an end to.
Yeah, and we're told, Britt, that it's not over, that John Kelly's cleaning house may very well continue. But you look at, and I put up this earlier, all of the Trump administration transitions, firings or resignations, 11 of them from February 13th until today. That is an administration in flux.
Yeah, and one might even argue that much of the time it's been an administration in turmoil. At least certain periods of time it certainly has been. Obviously, that is the Kelly mission, is to put a lot of that to rest, to end it, at least below the president. Of course, as we've talked about, Brett, the question that has been raised by the Kelly ascendancy has been how well he will manage the president. And I guess he has said publicly that it's not his job to manage the president, it's his job to manage the staff. The president's ways do raise a question of how effective a staff under him can be when he marches to his own drum at all times, and the best laid plans of the president and his staff sometimes are out the window because the president decides he wants to veer off in a different direction. These comments he made this week about Charlottesville being only the most conspicuous example.
Yeah. He had this big whiteboard, Steve Bannon did, in his office as chief strategist with all of the promises that candidate Donald Trump made on the campaign trail to try to keep policy to match that alongside. He was considered Trumpian. He called himself economic nationalist. There is not really a person who matches that besides the president now inside that White House.
I think that's true, Brett. I really do. But I do think this, that whatever the campaign promises may have been, it is very much the case that much of what has turned out to be the Trump agenda has been the conventional Republican Party agenda. That's been true on taxes. It was true on health care. It's true on a range of issues, with the possible exception of trade and immigration. But even there, the party seems to have been prepared to go along with him if he would undermines that in an interview with Bob Kuttner. I've known Bob Kuttner for 40 years. He's an honest journalist, but he is a hardcore liberal. And it's inexplicable that with his resignation on the president's desk, apparently, and perhaps the president deciding whether to accept it, he goes out and gives that interview to Kuttner in which he says that what the president and his team have essentially been saying about North Korea is BS. He can't survive that.
Britt Hume, as always, thank you.
Thanks, Brett.
The manhunt is intensifying tonight for suspects behind 2 deadly terror attacks on civilians in Spain. 13 died yesterday in Barcelona. Another person was killed today, along with several terrorists in the seaside town of Cambras. Let's go live to correspondent Benjamin Hall in Barcelona, where it's just past midnight. Hello, Benjamin.
Yeah, hi, Brett. We now know that these attacks were carried out by a cell of jihadis, at least 9 strong. They began here in Las Ramblas in Barcelona, then moved 62 miles south. Wounded but refusing to surrender, this terrorist is wearing what appears to be a suicide vest. The police shoot him down, but the confrontation continues.
Shots was fired, he then fell down, and then within 2 seconds he stood back up. He then stepped over the fence, charged the police again, and the police then gave some more shots, and then he fell down again.
This was the dramatic scene in Cambrils, a beachside resort 70 miles from Barcelona, as police shot dead 5 attackers after they rammed their car into pedestrians and police, killing 1 woman. The Cambrils attack came 8 hours after a white van mowed down pedestrians on Barcelona's picturesque Las Ramblas promenade, leaving 13 dead, including a 3-year-old boy. A moment of silence was held for victims of the attack, led by Prime Minister Rajoy and the Spanish King Felipe VI. The Prime Minister said his country is mourning in solidarity with the city.
Today, Spain, and more accurately Barcelona, has received the love and solidarity that we have shared with other cities and countries hit by the same terrorist brutality in other moments.
Police believe Musa Ukabir, 18, was the driver of the van. He remains at large, and today police searched his family's apartment about 90 miles north of Barcelona. Officials now believe the attacks are the work of a single terror cell, and that this house in Alcanar was its bomb factory. The house blew up on Wednesday in what investigators think was an error by the terrorists. Police have so far arrested 4 people, but said today they were still trying to identify the others.
The investigation at the moment is focused on the identification of the people who were at the Alcanar address, the identification of the 5 people shot dead in Cambrils, of which we have so far identified 3.
But despite the tragedy, today Las Ramblas was already clean and opened again, with tourists flowing up and down. A clear sign that this city will not bow to the terrorists. And 2 new pieces of information, Brett. One is that the driver of that white van was one of the men killed in Cambrils, and also that an American is among the dead, 42-year-old Jared Tucker from California. Back to you.
Benjamin Hall live in Barcelona. Benjamin, thank you. Authorities in the Finnish town of Turku are looking for more suspects tonight after a man stabbed 8 people before police shot him in the leg. At least 2 victims are dead. Security was heightened at Helsinki's international airport and across the country of Finland. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson back here in the U.S. is starting a new diversity policy at the State Department. Correspondent Rich Edson tells us it could have major implications for some high-profile jobs.
As President Trump's critics condemn his words responding to the racial violence in Charlottesville, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson unequivocally denounced those who trade in racial hatred.
We do not honor nor do we promote or accept hate speech in any form. And those who embrace it poison our public discourse, and they damage the very country that they claim to love.
Asked whether the secretary was addressing the president's comments blaming both sides, the State Department did not elaborate.
Racism is evil. It is antithetical to American values. It's antithetical to the American idea. So I think the secretary is clear in his personal beliefs about that.
During a speech to State Department interns and student fellows, the secretary announced a new diversity initiative.
We have a great diversity gap in the State Department. We need a State Department that reflects the American people, reflects who we are.
The department must consider one minority candidate for every open ambassador position, cultivate more minority employees for leadership, and design better recruiting efforts to improve diversity.
It enriches our work product to have individuals who come with a different cultural perspective or they come with different life experiences.
The State Department says about 12% of senior Foreign Service officers are non-white. Only a third are women. Secretary Tillerson says he also wants to draw future state employees from beyond the elite corners of the country.
America's best and brightest are not just from the Ivy League, but they're from a lot of other places in the country.
The secretary then concluded his remarks with some advice. He says, conduct yourself with integrity and you will live a life that is whole and complete. Fail to do so or compromise it away and you will live a life that is neither. Adding he has seen that happen to others before. Brett?
Rich Edson at the State Department. Rich, thank you. Another of President Trump's advisory boards is finished, at least for now. The members of the President's Committee on Arts and Humanities submitted a joint resignation letter this morning, citing his comments about racial violence in Virginia. Markets end the week on a sour note. The Dow down 76, the S&P 500 and the Nasdaq were off 5. For the week, the Dow lost almost 1 percentage point. The S&P 500 and the Nasdaq were down 2/3. The U.S. Secret Service says it's looking into comments from a state lawmaker in Missouri advocating the assassination of President Trump. Democratic State Senator Marie Chappelle Nadal says she was exercising her free speech rights with the Facebook post. She is refusing calls from Democratic leaders in Missouri, including 2 members of Congress, to resign. In the U.S. Senate, Democrats could have a big conundrum on their hands this fall. It involves the corruption trial of New Jersey Democratic Senator Bob Menendez and what might happen if he's convicted. Correspondent Doug McElway tells us what's at stake.
Jury selection gets underway next Tuesday in the bribery trial of New Jersey Democratic Senator Bob Menendez. It sets in motion a swirl of speculation about a shift in the balance of Senate power, less than a month after Republicans fell 1 vote short of repealing Obamacare.
The ayes are 49, the nays are 51.
Menendez is accused of using his Senate seat to help the financial interests of a friend, Dr. Solomon Melgen, who allegedly returned the favor with almost $1 million in gifts and campaign contributions. Menendez has said he's innocent.
These allegations are false, and I am confident they will be proven false, and I look forward to doing so in court.
His high-powered attorney, Abby Lowell, reminded reporters at the time of the Department of Justice's track record in winning political bribery convictions.
From former HUD Secretary Mike Espy in 1999 to Senator Ted Stevens in 2007. And 2 years ago, in the case of Senator John Edwards, prosecutors at the Justice Department often get it wrong.
But even if he is found guilty, a bribery conviction would not force Menendez out of the Senate. He would have to voluntarily step down or be expelled by a 2/3 majority. If all Republicans voted for expulsion, they would still need 15 Democrats. Unlikely, given their desire to oppose President Trump's agenda. New Jersey's governor would then appoint Menendez's successor, but the gubernatorial election to replace Republican Chris Christie is only months away, and Menendez could agree to leave after New Jersey's next governor takes office.
They're going to elect a new governor, and the Democratic candidate is heavily favored in that race.
Further bolstering Menendez's chances, since he was indicted, the Supreme Court unanimously threw out the bribery conviction of former Virginia Governor Bob McConnell, setting up an even higher bar for future political bribery convictions. Brett?
It's one to watch. Doug, thank you. The federal case is expanding against a former IT aide to Florida Democratic Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Imran Awan is accused of conspiracy and making false statements. Wasserman Schultz, who is, of course, the former head of the Democratic National Committee, has drawn criticism for keeping Awan on her payroll months after a criminal investigation was revealed and he was barred from the House IT network. Schultz says it is all a right-wing media attempt to distract from the president's Russia investigation. This is a Fox News alert about our top story. The website Breitbart says its former leader is coming home. Steve Bannon is out as White House chief strategist, but moments ago, Breitbart's White House correspondent tweeted, Steve Bannon returned to Breitbart News as executive chairman of Breitbart News and chaired our evening editorial meeting. We will talk about all of this with the host of Tucker Carlson Tonight. Tucker Carlson joins me after the break about the breaking news of Steve Bannon out as chief strategist in the Trump White House. Your brain changes as you get older. Steve Bannon's departure as chief strategist for President Trump has a lot of people talking, and now he is back at Breitbart News. Tucker Carlson, host of Tucker Carlson Tonight, 8 p.m. Eastern, here on Fox News Channel, joins us now with his thoughts. He's in Bozeman, Montana tonight. Tucker, your take.
I think this is a big deal. It's being framed in terms of identity politics. Is Steve Bannon a racist or is he not? But the real story has to do with ideas and policies. Bannon was one of the only populist conservatives in the White House. In fact, really at his level, one of the rare Republicans in the White House. And he staked out positions were at odds with the majority on virtually every possible policy topic: energy, climate, trade, immigration, foreign policy. Bannon was one of the people fighting against H.R. McMaster on sending more American troops to Afghanistan, for example. He would have fought against, I think, any attempt to send troops to Venezuela, something the president mentioned. He was the voice of a very specific and pretty large group of people, all of whom were Trump voters. So to put it another way, the left obviously despises the president. Institutional Republicans feel the same way. The one group still sympathetic to the president were really represented ideologically by Steve Bannon. So what does this mean exactly politically for the president? I don't know, but I don't think it's a small thing.
I had Deputy Campaign Manager of the Trump campaign, Dave Bossie, on earlier in the 5 o'clock hour. Here's what he said about Steve Bannon going back outside. Now we know, back to Breitbart News. Take a listen.
Steve Bannon leaving the White House does not necessarily stop him from helping the president fulfill that agenda. And actually, Steve's position is, with me today, is that it's now easier for him to do the things, to participate in a way that he's not handcuffed like he was inside the White House. Being on the outside, there's a lot of freedom, and you have a lot more weapons at your disposal than when you're handcuffed inside the White House.
You buy that, Tucker?
He's got a lot more weapons, that's for certain. Some of them might hurt the president, though. I mean, there will be, I don't think there's any question about it, attacks from Breitbart and from that sector of American conservatives, the populist, non-establishment sector of American conservatives, aimed at the White House. And the strong feeling is that a lot of these people at the senior staff level at the White House are very hostile to the agenda that the president ran on. And I really think this could be the moment where those people start to defect and begin to criticize this administration in a way that they have not up until this point. So I think there's a lot of risk, actually, for the Trump administration in this.
Right. So he could say that he's fighting or battling for President Trump, but still be battling against the Gary Cohns, Dina Powells, H.R. McMasters, John Kellys, who are now in ascendancy inside the Trump White House.
I mean, frame it this way, and this is what people around Bannon are saying, and I think it's right. Of all the people you just named, how many of them would have been uncomfortable in a Hillary Clinton administration? Probably none of them. Steve Bannon would not have fit in a Hillary Clinton White House, period. So if you frame it that way and you start attacking from that position, you know, it hurts. They potentially could do real damage, I think, to the president's last remaining stronghold of support.
Tucker, as always, thank you. We'll see you at 8 p.m. Eastern on Fox News Channel.
Thanks, Brett.
Up next, Monday's solar eclipse. A big deal or much ado about nothing? First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox 13 in Salt Lake City as a Utah National Guard guardsman killed in eastern Afghanistan, is remembered during a candlelight vigil. Staff Sergeant Aaron Butler died Wednesday when he entered a booby-trapped building that then exploded. Fox 6 in Milwaukee as the Wisconsin State Assembly passes a $3 billion tax break package for a Taiwan-based electronics company. Foxconn, you've heard a lot about it, plans to build a massive LCD display panel factory in the state. Supporters say it will create 13,000 jobs. Critics say it will be at least 25 years before the state makes its money back. This is a live look at Boston, a rainy Boston from Fox 25, our affiliate there. The big story there tonight. Boston's mayor and police commissioner say about 500 officers are being deployed to make sure there is no violence during a free speech rally and counter protests this weekend. Organizers of the event Saturday on Boston Common say it is about free speech. Critics say it is about white supremacy. We'll see what happens. We've got you covered here on Fox. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back.
We're out of the office. But that isn't...
You may have heard. You've heard. Quite a show is expected Monday all over the U.S. It is the first coast-to-coast full solar eclipse in 99 years. Millions of Americans are planning to watch. Are you? It brings a large set of opportunities, but also problems to many communities across this country. Correspondent Dan Springer is in Seattle tonight.
Madras, Oregon, population 6,000, is fast becoming a madhouse. Long ago identified as one of the premier places to see the first coast-to-coast U.S. solar eclipse in a century, the city is bracing for 100,000 visitors this weekend.
This is 3 Super Bowls along with the Winter Olympics coming to Madras.
Nearly all hotels and campsites for miles have been booked for 2 years. Many homeowners are renting out their houses. This one snagged $1,500 a night with a 4-night minimum. J.R. Brooks, who's organizing Solar Fest, rented a carrot field to create a makeshift solar town. He'll house 20,000 campers, and for $3,500, he'll rent you half a shipping container.
It's got air conditioning, beds, daily change out, showers, electricity, Wi-Fi, TV, the whole 9 yards. And that's the top of the line.
It's all to see the rare solar system dance that occurs when the moon is at its closest to the Earth and sitting perfectly in front of the sun, turning day into night. Everyone in the lower 48 states will see at least a partial eclipse, but a total eclipse will be visible over a 70-mile wide area that will start on the Oregon coast at 10:17 in the morning and end 93 minutes later at the South Carolina coast. This Californian drove to Idaho to be in the path of totality.
We're going to be here come hell or high water.
Special viewing glasses are a must, and watch out for scams. Retina specialists say unless they're made with ISO 123122, permanent damage could be done quickly.
Anything more than a second or two really is very risky.
Oregon is expecting 1 million eclipse chasers, clogging roads so badly the governor declared a state of emergency to deploy the National Guard. For those who missed this total eclipse, the wait for the next one that will cross the entire U.S. won't be nearly as long. August of 2045, or 28 years for the next chance to bark at the moon in the middle of the day. Brett?
All right, check those glasses. All right, Dan Springer live out there in Oregon. Thanks, Dan. Not everyone is celebrating, obviously, Monday's eclipse. And tonight's Focus on Faith, religion correspondent Lauren Green reports there are people who believe it means much more than meets the eye.
In a few days, millions will witness a rare total solar eclipse as the moon blocks out the sun, arching a path across the nation. But beyond the science, some see biblical prophecy that the heavens tell of divine destiny, even a sign of the end times predicted in the Holy Scriptures.
Signs are a mystery. So are prophecy. Both those things, they're shrouded in mystery and they have to be unlocked.
Hudson Pillar can only speculate what the eclipse could mean.
Right now we're living in a divided nation. We're seeing lawlessness. We're seeing just recently what's happened. I wonder if it's not a sign from God asking us to come back to our senses.
From the Old to New Testament, several verses in the Bible reference eclipses. The prophet Joel predicts what many believe is the second coming of Christ at the last days, saying, "The sun will be turned to darkness and the moon to blood before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord." But astrophysicist and Christian Dr. Hugh Ross says eclipses are far too common to put faith in predicting in prophetical meaning, but instead sees eclipses as marvels that give us proof of a creator.
And that enables us to build really detailed models of the history of stars, which was a huge factor in establishing the Big Bang creation model, a model that was predicted thousands of years ago in the pages of the Old Testament.
Jewish scholars say the sages of the Talmud believed an eclipse was a bad omen caused by our sins.
The next solar eclipse is due in 7 years, an interesting biblical number of completion. The question for some biblical scholars is God completing something in this 7-year cycle, or is it just another spectacular show in the sky? Brett?
Lauren, thank you. The president's chief strategist is out. So what now? He's in at Breitbart News. What does all this mean politically? We'll get reaction from the panel after a quick break.
A story about
Trump had those ideas, had that energy, had that vision that could galvanize a team around him of disparate. Look, we're a coalition. You know, a lot of people think, have strong beliefs about different things, but we understand that you can come together to win, and we understood that from August 15th, and we never had a doubt, and Donald Trump never had a doubt that he was going to win. And I think that is the power of this movement.
Steve Bannon out as chief strategist at the White House, saying he's going to fight on the outside for Trump against his opponents, but telling the Weekly Standard just within the last hour or so, quoting here, Bannon was candid and blunt. Quote, "The Trump presidency that we fought for and won is over," Bannon said. "We still have a huge movement, and we will make something of this Trump presidency. But that presidency is over. It'll be something else, and there'll be all kinds of fights, and there'll be good days and bad days, but that presidency is over." Politico has a headline tonight that says, "Get ready for Bannon the Barbarian." In the days before his departure, the Trump guru told associates he was itching for a return to guerrilla warfare. With that, let's bring in our panel. Charles Hurt, opinion editor for the Washington Times. Karen Tumulty, national political correspondent for the Washington Post, and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. Charlie, when he says, "I'm going outside to fight for Trump and against his opponents," what is clear is that some of the opponents he sees are inside the White House.
I think it's about to get very interesting. I know that there are some people, some Republicans in Washington who are probably cheering at this, but a very significant bear has just been unchained from the White House. And I think that a lot of these people, and you're right, there are going to be some of them that are in the administration, in the White House. I think there are even more of them up on Capitol Hill who have just earned themselves a new enemy. And I think he is not going to quit. But I also think that we can make a little too much of it as well. There are these issues like the environment or illegal immigration where Donald Trump has been unshakable in his commitment to those things that he and Steve Bannon have both been fighting for a long time. I think in the other areas like Afghanistan and some of these global affairs issues or trade with China, things like that, I think that's where we're going to see a lot of the fireworks.
So, Karen, to Bannon's quote, is that Trump presidency over? Are we seeing a new evolution, a kind of formation of this new Trump presidency?
There is nothing linear to the Trump presidency. So to declare that something is over or something has begun is almost meaningless with this president. But we do know that Trump's world is the Hotel California. He has checked out, but he is not likely to leave. He still has the president's cell phone number. Steve Bannon.
Steve Bannon.
Yes, Steve Bannon is, he's off the leash in the new sort of order that General Kelly is trying to impose, where the White House chief of staff controls who goes into and out of the office and who sees the president. But I think Steve Bannon is very much going to be in President Trump's ear.
I mean, you look back at this interview with American Prospect that he gave, and some of the things he said. Among them, you have the white nationalist movement. These guys are a collection of clowns. Ethno-nationalism, it's losers. It's a fringe element. I think the media plays it up too much, and we got to help crush it, help crush it more. The Democrats, the longer they talk about identity politics, I got them. I want them to talk about racism every day. If the left is focused on race and identity, and we go with economic nationalism, we can crush the Democrats. In the wake of everything we saw this week, it obviously was not a message that was well received.
I think that was part. There were several strikes against Bannon about that interview. North Korea, the undermining of the president's policy, basically saying it's a bluff and it's an empty bluff. The China part, where he said we're at war, economic war with China, just when the president is trying to use Chinese influence on the North Korea problem. And then this. I mean, it may be that they've made their calculation, President has, particularly when he came out for retaining the Confederate memorials. This is a winning issue. If you look at the polls, it is a winning issue. And they want to play this in part to get away from the Charlottesville press conference, but also in part because it's a winning issue, a cultural issue inside the country. But you don't say it out loud. That's what I think was so amazing about this. Bannon is saying, we want race to be an issue. We want the country to be divided over this because we're going to win. So you add that, I think, on the ledger of things you simply don't say in an interview, and you had what I called on the show earlier, the Scaramucci moment. There's certain things that you simply can't say and survive, and he didn't survive.
So there are conservatives, Charlie, who are saying that this is the last of the Trumpians, besides President Trump himself. And Tucker Carlson earlier on this show said, look at everybody else who's advising the president, and would they feel uncomfortable in a Hillary Clinton administration? I mean, what about that for conservatives who look at this administration and say, this is not the one that I saw?
But I think that's a very good point, but it's also worth remembering that Donald Trump is not afraid to roll any of the people around him. And he's rolled a lot of people. He rolls his own daughter on the Paris climate deal. I think that the fact that that Trump himself is the last Trumpian in the White House is a very significant detail. And the loss of Steve Bannon is significant, but I don't think that it necessarily changes all of that.
Mm-hmm. And on the outside, he has a huge megaphone in Breitbart News. He apparently is now back to being the executive chairman and also led the afternoon editorial meeting today. It happened quickly. Executive chairman of Breitbart News Friday afternoon, the tweet went out. He has a lot of information, a lot of inside scoop from that White House that now is at his fingertips.
And I think perhaps even more significant than his return to Breitbart is the fact that he reportedly on Wednesday night, Steve Bannon had dinner with Robert Mercer, one of the
hedge fund billionaire,
biggest financiers of his form of nationalism that there is. And so I wouldn't be even slightly surprised if they come up with some entirely new organism for carrying this out.
Trump TV, Bannon style.
Absolutely. Look, what happened today is that the Civil War moved from inside the White House to outside the White House. But the war continues. Bannon is very clearly going after the same list of people he found were undermining the president that he talked about in that interview. He's going to go after them from the Breitbart platform or any other. He's going to go after all the softies, as he sees it, on policy. And this is going to be really a bloody affair. I think he's been immensely strengthened. I mean, who heard of Bannon a year ago? Everybody's heard of Bannon now. And I think the meeting with the Mercers is very significant. He's got billions of dollars behind him, the platform, the machinery of Breitbart under him, and he's got a clear, free fire zone. He's not held back anymore. For Trump, it was quite a risk, which is, I think, why it took him so long to get rid of Bannon. It was a double-edged sword, and he's now going to have to face one of those edges.
Real quick.
Well, it's been bloody up to now as well, because
you look at that list.
Yeah,
I put up the list earlier of the 11 firings or resignations since February 13th.
Yeah, and then also on the Hill, you've actually had the Trump administration fail to get key things through, and I think that with Bannon on the outside, that there's a good chance that he'll be able to help get some of these things through.
Interesting. Next up, the Friday lightning round. A conundrum for Senate Democrats, possibly. Diversity in the State Department, plus winners and losers.
It's time for the biggest sale of the year. These allegations are false, and I am confident they will be proven false. I have always conducted myself appropriately and in accordance with the law.
New Jersey Democratic Senator Bob Menendez, the jury selection for that trial, bribery trial, starts Tuesday. And there's a whole bunch of speculation about what happens if this case really goes forward and prosecutors are able to make it stick. He gets convicted. Then what happens? We're back with our panel. Charles.
Well, I think that's an unlikely outcome, but assuming it happens, assuming he resigns, then you have this crazy situation where if all this happens while Chris Christie is still in office, you get one more Republican added on that side of the ledger in the Senate, which would be quite helpful. You might even be able to pass the skinny repeal of Obamacare because you needed that one more vote. On the other hand, if it gets delayed and you get an election afterwards that the Democrats look like they're going to win, then nothing will change. So it's a very odd situation, and I'm sure a lot of people are rooting probably for the wrong reasons for him to win or lose his case.
Yeah, I mean, we should point out he's innocent until proven guilty, but this case is significant. It's going forward.
But the degree of difficulty in getting a conviction is significantly higher in the wake of the Supreme Court's decision in former Virginia Governor Bob McConnell. So I think, again, the chances of getting a conviction are not as clear as they might have looked before.
Secretary of State Rex Tillerson today on diversity.
Every time we have an opening for an ambassador position, at least one of the candidates must be a minority candidate. Whether it's African American, Latino, Hispanic, women, LBGT, come with experiences I do not know. This enriches the quality of our work. We do not honor nor do we promote or accept hate speech in any form. And those who embrace it poison our public discourse, and they damage the very country that they claim to love.
A clear statement from the Secretary of State, obviously in the wake of everything we saw this week.
Yeah, and this rule, it's kind of amusing that it's happening at the State Department, which is probably the least meritocratic institution on the planet. And it's also known as the Rooney Rule for for Dan Rooney, who owned the Pittsburgh Steelers, who is, of course, picked as ambassador to Ireland by Barack Obama after he supported him early. So,
Charles?
You're absolutely right. It is the Rooney Rule, which, look, overall, I think it's a good idea. It is patronizing. It is in some ways condescending, particularly for those who are chosen to be interviewed. They got asked us, is it because of my competence or because of my race? Nonetheless, I think the case that Tillerson made was right. It does expose people to being seen by others who might not have been seen for perhaps even a future appointment. So overall, it's a good thing.
All right, winners and losers. Winner first.
My winner is Elle Reeve of Vice News, who really produced an extraordinary 22-minute documentary out of Charlottesville by letting the story tell itself. And my loser is Trump's agenda after that news conference this week. There wasn't even supposed to be a news conference. It's becoming clearer and clearer that the main obstacle of President Trump's agenda may be his own lack of discipline.
Okay, Charlie, winner then loser.
Well, I had a hard time finding a winner this week. It's been a rough one. But if there is one, it's probably David Duke, who is an irrelevant racist dirtbag, who got given millions and millions of dollars worth of free advertising from
strong letter to follow
from in the past week, and he should be instead completely ignored. My loser of the week are the millions and millions of very good-hearted, decent people around the country who are historically and culturally minded Americans who don't want to see their public statues and monuments toppled or co-opted by racist instigators and violent leftist thugs.
Winner then loser.
Winner is the Democratic Party. Trump's segue to the defense of those monuments that Charlie just talked about may prove a political winner in the short run if you believe in the polls. But in the